Episode 1: The Whispering Oak Covenant. Sarah Jensen drove her old sedan over a moss-covered road. The rare Oregon sunlight was swallowed by the dense canopy of pine trees. She was heading to Blackwood Creek, a dilapidated little town famous for its charming name, yet hiding an inexplicable chill. Sarah's mission was to sell Whispering Oak Manor, a house that had been abandoned for half a century, cursed in every local legend. She knew it was a suicide mission, but the massive commission was the only lifeline for her dying career. Whispering Oak appeared, a magnificent but ruined Victorian structure, like a gray skeleton standing in the dark landscape. The shattered windows resembled blind eyes staring into the forest. Right in front of the porch, a giant, ancient oak, its branches twisted like bony fingers, stood as if guarding something. When Sarah turned off the engine, an absolute silence descended. There was no sound of birdsong, only the faint whistle of the wind like meaningless whispers. Sarah opened the door and stepped inside. The air was heavy, the smell of mildew and rotting wood hitting her nostrils. The house was covered in thick dust, but in the corner of the living room, Sarah caught a misplaced scent, the smell of old, dry incense, as if it had been burned a very long time ago. She tried to calm herself, beginning her work of taking photos and notes. In the library, where moth-eaten books lay scattered, Sarah found an old transaction ledger. The ornate handwriting was faded, detailing the purchase of the house by the Blackwood family in the 1920s. The last line of the signatory section sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Every family member had a clear signature, except the very last one, a simple, childlike scrawl. That night, Sarah decided to stay over to get a feel for the space, as she told her boss. She lay in the master bedroom on the second floor, under the faint moonlight filtering through the shutters. The sound of wind whistling through the cracks began to amplify, but it wasn't the usual wind. They were indistinct whispers, as if someone was repeating her name from the hallway. Sarah couldn't sleep. She got up to check her camera. All the photos she had taken of the house were covered in a thin layer of fog, and in the corner of one photo of the living room, a tall, shadowy figure stood, silently. Her hands trembled. She tried to ignore it, but a strange object on the dresser caught her attention. An antique brass key. She was certain it hadn't been there before. Around 2 a.m, the silence was shattered by the sound of an old piano from the downstairs living room. It was a cheerful antique tune, but it was drawn out and horribly distorted, sounding like someone laughing hysterically. Sarah's heart pounded. She mustered all her courage and crept down the stairs, her steps cautious on the creaking wooden steps. The melody stopped abruptly the moment she reached the living room door. The room was dark and empty, yet on the tattered velvet sofa, there was a clear, fresh indentation, as if someone had just been sitting there and got up the second she arrived. Sarah gasped, turned on her flashlight, and looked up at the large mirror above the fireplace. For a moment, her reflection in the mirror changed. It was the reflection of a woman in a white 1920s dress, her face obscured by long hair. The woman raised her hand, her bony finger pointing straight at Sarah's jacket pocket, where the brass key lay. Panic turned into a primal fear. Sarah rushed back to the library, where she had found the key's clue. She noticed a small, tightly locked wooden box, subtly hidden behind the bookshelf. The brass key fit perfectly. Inside the box was an old parchment, not the transaction ledger, but the Blackwood family's true covenant. She read the fading Latin inscription. In exchange for 100 years of prosperity, the soul of the youngest child shall be taken. At the same time, there was a loud bang. The library door slammed shut, locked tight. Sarah spun around. The child with the scrawled signature was standing in the middle of the room. It neither cried nor smiled, only raising a small, ice-cold finger to its chapped lips, signaling silence. The child pointed at the Covenant. Sarah felt an invisible, icy pressure crushing her chest, making her unable to breathe. She tried to scream, but the sound was trapped. A chilling whisper echoed from all directions, not from the wind, but from the very walls and floor. The Covenant has expired. A new signatory is needed. You shall be the next Blackwood. Sign. Sarah reached for the fountain pen on the desk. An invisible force gripped her arm, dragging the pen across the old parchment. She struggled, but her will was utterly defeated by desperation and terror. She felt herself becoming a mere instrument. Finally, a name was written out in extreme, distorted agony. Sarah Jensen. As the last letter was completed, the child vanished. The weight on Sarah's chest disappeared. The smell of dry incense and mildew vanished, replaced by the sweet, intense fragrance of lilies. The house became frighteningly warm and quiet. The next morning, Sarah's car was still parked in front of Whispering Oak. She was not there. A few days later, the listing to sell Whispering Oak Manor was taken down. Instead, a new notice appeared on the Blackwood Creek bulletin board. Sold to private party. New family moved in. Locals whispered that night they heard cheerful, lively piano music coming from the haunted house. And a warm light was always on the second floor, as if welcoming a new life. But what kind of life? No one dared to ask. Episode 2. The Blood Road of Route 66. Alex was a long-haul trucker. He wasn't just chasing a schedule, he was on the run, fleeing a horrifying night 3 years ago in Denver when he hit something on the highway and drove away in a drunken panic, not daring to look back. His Freightliner truck was barreling down the old broken Route 66, deep in the heart of the Arizona desert. The road stretched out like a brick-red scar beneath the cloudless twilight sky. The area was eerily deserted. Nothing but abandoned gas stations and crumbling ghost towns. Alex turned up the radio, trying to shake off the suffocating loneliness. Around midnight, a few miles from the Two Guns ghost town, he saw a figure on the side of the road. It was a young woman in a thin white dress, standing amidst the desert chill. She raised her thumb, asking for a ride. Alex stopped. He knew the unwritten rule among truckers about hitchhikers on Route 66, but the girl's desperate gaze and delicate, beautiful appearance made it impossible for him to refuse. The girl climbed into the passenger seat. She introduced herself as Ilara. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. The strange thing was that even though the outside temperature was near freezing, her skin was ice cold, even through her thin clothing. And her eyes, though beautiful, were vacant, reflecting no light at all. Alex started telling a few jokes to break the suffocating silence. Ilara didn't laugh. Instead, she pointed to an old, faded poster taped on Alex's dashboard. "This road holds too many stories," Ilara said. "It keeps everything that's been spilled onto it, especially blood." She began to recount accidents, not regular accidents. She spoke of a truck driver whose brakes were cut, sending him crashing into a canyon in the 80s. She spoke of a newlywed couple hit and killed right at mile marker 305. She described the details with terrifying precision, as if she had been a witness. Alex felt a shiver run down his spine. He tried to steer the conversation elsewhere. but Alara always brought it back to the road. "You know, the scariest people are not the dead," Alara whispered. "It's the ones who caused the death and drove away. They think the road will forget, but it never does." Alara's voice began to carry a tense, cold edge. Her vacant eyes were fixed on Alex. "Have you ever heard about a stretch of road near Denver?" Alara asked abruptly. "A stormy night, 3 years ago. A blue car hit something, maybe an animal, or maybe a person." Alex's heart stopped. His car that night was a blue Ford Focus. "I don't know what you're talking about," Alex stammered, trying to keep the steering wheel steady. Alara gently placed her hand on Alex's arm. Her skin was so cold it felt like a freezing burn. "A young person, hit and left in the rain. They found her the next morning. The car was gone, but the broken headlight fragments remained." Alara tilted her head, offering a faint, sorrowful smile. "And she didn't die instantly." She waited. Alex slammed on the brakes. The truck screeched to a halt in the middle of the empty desert road. "Get out!" Alex yelled, his voice cracking. "Get out, right now! Who are you?" Alara didn't move. She stared at him, her eyes no longer vacant, but filled with a deep sadness mixed with vengeance. "Don't you recognize me, Alex?" she asked. "You've been running for 3 years, but I never left this road." She slowly rolled up her sleeve. Despite wearing long sleeves right above her arm, through the fabric appeared an old, deep, sunken wound that matched the description of a collision injury. Alex trembled, covering his mouth with his hand. He realized the hitchhiker didn't smell of the desert or dust. She smelled of cold rain and wet asphalt. I'm sorry," Alex whispered, tears beginning to stream down his face. Alara smiled again. This time her smile was a verdict. "I don't need an apology, Alex," she said, her voice becoming resonant and cold. "I just need you to stay here. This road is lonely, and it needs guilty souls for company." She squeezed Alex's arm tightly. The cold spread through his body, paralyzing and painful. Alex saw a brilliant flash of headlights from behind, even though no car was approaching. The light was so intense it blinded him, and a truck horn blared an agonizing sound. "We will stay on Route 66 forever," Alara said. "Together. The road has called you." Alex felt he was no longer in control of his body. His foot slammed the gas pedal, and the steering wheel violently swerved to the right. The truck sped off Route 66, tearing through an old barbed wire fence and plunging into a dry ditch, rolling several times. The next day, police found the overturned Freightliner, severely damaged, in the ravine. The driver, Alex, was killed instantly. The police recorded the accident as truck malfunction and driver fatigue. When the truck was towed away, a small white wallet was found on the passenger seat, empty of money or identification, containing only one small piece of old soaked parchment. On the parchment, only a single line was written in dried blood. "Excellent. A new soul." On nights with a full moon, along that desolate stretch near Two Guns, people still say that if you slow down and flash your headlights 3 times, you might see a girl in a white dress raising her thumb, waiting for a ride. Episode 3. The Devil's Bridge Croon. The night has fallen upon the deep canyon lands, where the towering red sandstone cliffs are now nothing more than massive shadows, swallowing the starlight. Central to this desolate setting is a colossal natural rock formation, locally branded with the chilling name, the Devil's Bridge. It is said that this bridge is a confluence of 2 worlds, and its curse has existed for centuries, soaking into every cold layer of stone. The legend tells of a woman named Eliza, who was betrayed and abandoned just before her wedding day. In her overwhelming agony, she threw herself into the deep gorge beneath the bridge. Since then, on nights of the new moon, When no light is strong enough to banish the darkness, Eliza's spirit returns. She does not shriek or moan, but instead emits a wailing croon, a song of dead love that echoes through the stone arch as an unending lament. Mark does not believe in ghost stories. He is a brave urban explorer, always equipped with professional cameras and recording gear, ready to debunk every mystery with science. Tonight, he has pitched his tent near the base of the bridge, determined to record the acoustic phenomenon that everyone talks about. Mark checks all his equipment, aiming the directional microphone straight at the stone arch. Around him, there is only the sound of wind through the leaves and the buzzing of insects, creating a terrifying silence. The clock hand creeps towards midnight. Suddenly, the insect noises seem to cease, giving way to an absolute, heavy silence. Mark feels a shiver run down his spine, not from the cold, but from an invisible pressure that is enveloping him. He stares at the recorder, waiting, and then it comes. At first, it is only a very light humming sound, like a breath, a long ah. It doesn't sound like wind, nor does it seem natural. It is a melody, an ancient and utterly sorrowful tune, as if sung by a voice that has lost all hope. Mark swallows hard, quickly hitting the record button on his handheld camera. The song begins to grow clearer, as if it is moving closer to his location. It lingers in the air, without a clear direction, creating the sensation that it is surrounding him. Mark feels his heart pounding. He tries to stay calm, constantly muttering, "It's just an acoustic effect, just an echo." But then, a terrifying thing happens. The flashlight he had placed on his tent pole suddenly snaps off, plunging Mark into a thick, almost suffocating darkness. At the same time, the gentle humming transforms into a heart-wrenching scream, a sound of ultimate pain, and it is no longer far away. It rings out right next to Mark's ear, close enough for him to feel an icy cold breath on the back of his neck. Terrified, Mark stops thinking about science or evidence. He jumps up, grabs the recording camera, and runs for his life out of the campsite, crashing through thorny bushes. After running a long distance and regaining some breath, Mark stops, trembling, and turns to look back at the Devil's Bridge. Through his shaking phone screen, he sees a faint, tall, pale white figure. It is the silhouette of a woman in a tattered wedding dress, her long black hair hanging down. She does not jump, does not move, but merely stands silently on the highest arch, and her hollow black eyes are staring straight at Mark. The feeling of being watched nearly makes him collapse. Mark panics and speeds away in his car, fleeing the canyon area. When he is completely out of the gorge, he checks the camera. The final part of the video is nothing but a pitch-black screen. But as he is about to turn it off, Mark hears it. Very small, very weak, but unmistakable. The sorrowful croon is still there, echoing in the recording. It has followed him home. Episode 4. The Endless Hallway. The house stood hidden behind tall, dense trees in an ancient town on the outskirts of New York. It was a 3-story Victorian townhouse, over a century old, covered with decaying wooden planks boarding up all the windows and doors. People called it the Blind Tailor's House. Since it was abandoned, no one dared to come near it. Urban legend has it that the owner, an old tailor named Silas, lost his only daughter in a tragic fire. Blind and heartbroken from the accident, Silas went mad. He believed that if he used thread to sew shut every exit and every window, he could keep his daughter's spirit trapped inside the house forever. But the house did not hold love. It held madness. Inside, The walls and hallways were said to have warped, forming an endless, inescapable labyrinth. Sarah, an architecture student with a strange fascination for abandoned homes, decided to break in. She wanted to explore the unique design details of the old Victorian house. She used a crowbar to pry open a rotten plank on the back door and slipped inside. Stepping across the threshold, Sarah felt an abrupt change. The air inside was heavy and stifling, carrying the scent of damp decay, dust, and a faint metallic smell. The light filtering in through the gaps was blocked by thick curtains and old coverings. Everything was dark. The strangest thing was the unreasonably high ceiling, and the hallway ahead of her seemed to stretch infinitely compared to the house's exterior dimensions. Sarah turned on her flashlight and started recording. She took photos of the details, but upon review, the pictures only showed white, swirling threads and long black shadows cast like giant sewing needles. Feeling uneasy, she decided to turn back, but when she turned around, the back door was gone. In its place was a solid wooden wall, reinforced with multiple layers of fabric and barbed wire. She was trapped. Panicked, Sarah ran down the hallway. She ran and ran, but every turn, every door she opened, led her back to the exact spot where she had started. The house was an endless, looping maze. She began to hear strange sounds, a steady, metallic clinking, like the sound of a sewing machine needle working, interspersed with weak sighs coming from within the walls. In a dilapidated room, Sarah found the epicenter of the madness. An old sewing machine sitting on a table, its chair overturned. On the table was an embroidered piece of cloth with scrawled words stitched in white thread. "Cannot get out. Not finished sewing." She just managed to turn her camera to record the cloth when the sewing machine suddenly started up. No one touched it, but the flywheel spun rapidly, the needle plunging fiercely into the air. The sound of metal piercing fabric, piercing air, created a chilling rhythm. Sarah backed away. Her flashlight beam swept across the dark corner of the room, and she saw it. It was a tall, hunched figure wearing an old tailor's coat. He stood there, motionless. His face was obscured by shadow, but Sarah could sense the hollow eyes staring directly at her. His thin, bony hand was raised, as if he was trying to sew the darkness around the room, pulling the walls closer together. The sewing machine noise grew faster and more frantic. The tailor's shadow suddenly lurched closer. Sarah let out a terrifying shriek, so horrified that she dropped the recording phone onto the floor. The last sound recorded was the metallic thud of a sharp object piercing something soft, followed by a deathly silence. Episode 5: The Phantom Bus of Route 66. The legendary Route 66, a place where long journeys, vintage neon signs, and ghost stories intersect. But on a remote, forgotten stretch of road in Oklahoma, where the cracked asphalt is just a hopeless black strip beneath the star-filled sky, there is a warning. Never drive alone through here after 3 a.m. That is when the phantom bus appears. This is no ancient tale. The accident occurred in the 1970s when a school bus lost its brakes and plunged into a ravine. The horrific crash claimed the lives of the driver and 12 children. It is said that because it never reached its destination, the bus continues its journey on this cursed route. And if you encounter it, you won't just be overtaken. You will be chosen as the newest passenger to fill the empty seats. Mike, a long-haul truck driver with a thick beard and a gruff demeanor, did not believe in such nonsense. He was on a delivery run through Oklahoma, his heavy 18-wheeler ripping through the night. He turned on his dash cam, scoffed at the fanciful story, and challenged any ghost to show itself. When the clock on his dashboard hit exactly 3:03 a.m., a small but chilling event occurred. Mike's truck headlights suddenly flickered 3 times in quick succession. At the same moment, the radio, which had been blasting loud country music, switched to jarring white noise, static, interspersed with faint, distant children's giggles. Mike frowned, slamming his hand against the radio, assuming it was just an electrical malfunction. But a feeling of unease began to crawl up his spine. He looked in his left side mirror. Far behind him, he saw a faint yellow light approaching at a terrifying speed. It was old, weak headlight beams, not belonging to a regular car. Mike squinted. As the light drew nearer, the blurry shape of an old, faded yellow school bus became clear, its body looking ragged. The most terrifying part was, the bus was completely silent. There was no sound of a roaring engine, no friction of tires on the pavement. It simply glided over the asphalt, faster than any vehicle he had ever seen. Mike struggled to keep the steering wheel steady as the phantom bus passed him. In the brief moment it drove alongside, Mike looked straight through his side window. He saw no one sitting in the driver's seat, and through the murky passenger windows, he saw multiple blurry black shadows, the size of children, sitting neatly in the passenger seats. All of them turned their heads and stared at Mike. Mike barely managed to shout. He staggered and looked back into his rearview mirror. The phantom bus did not drive further away. It simply vanished right before his eyes, leaving behind a chilling streak of cold mist that swept past the back of his truck. Mike slammed the gas pedal to the floor to escape the area. But immediately his truck began to malfunction. The engine sputtered, struggled to accelerate, and worst of all, the brakes felt loose. Mike desperately grabbed his phone to call for help. Just as he was about to dial the number, the previously silent radio suddenly crackled to life. This time it wasn't white noise, but a child's voice, distorted, like it was coming through an old telephone line, whispering, "We're waiting for you. Get on the bus. Your seat is still empty." Mike dropped the phone, staring blankly into the rearview mirror. In the deep darkness of the road, the faint yellow lights of the phantom bus suddenly reappeared. And this time, they were extremely close, seemingly just meters from his truck's bumper. The dashcam footage ends abruptly, with the image of the phantom bus lights shining intensely, and Mike's piercing scream. Episode 6. The Door to Room 404. The Cortez Hotel stands right in the heart of Los Angeles, a magnificent yet gloomy structure with a history dense with unexplained deaths. It's not just a building, it's a trap. Among all the rumored haunted rooms, Room 404 is considered the most terrifying. Legend has it that this is where a young actress took her own life in the 1950s. However, after the incident, the room's door seemingly transformed into a gateway leading to somewhere else, where darkness and despair reign eternally. Ella, a professional ghost blogger, rented a room directly across from Room 404. She didn't believe that a door could lead to another dimension, but she was curious about the strange noises the hotel tried to conceal. She set up her camera to continuously record the heavy, old wooden door of Room 404. The first night passed in disappointing silence. Ella began to mock herself for wasting her time. However, on the second night, things began. Around 2:30 a.m., the camera recorded a bizarre phenomenon. The hallway light near Room 404 suddenly flickered wildly, as if short-circuiting. Simultaneously, Ella heard a faint sound, like an old out-of-tune piano, emanating from inside the empty room. It was a sad, slow melody, yet completely discordant. Ella decided to act. She grabbed her flashlight and voice recorder and stepped out into the hallway. As she approached the door to Room 404, the piano music stopped. Instead, she heard a different sound, the very small sobbing of a woman. She pressed her ear against the door. It was ice cold and heavy. The sobbing ceased. She then heard knocking from the inside, gentle but deliberate, 3 consecutive taps. Despite her fear, Ella placed the recorder on the floor and brought her eye up to the keyhole. The keyhole of room 404 was supposedly sealed shut with a brass plate long ago, but tonight it was open. Through the keyhole, Ella did not see a hotel room, but rather another dark hallway, narrower, older, with peeling wallpaper. In her faint flashlight beam, she saw a large mirror at the end of that hallway. In the mirror, she saw herself, standing in the hallway of the Cortez Hotel. But there was one horrifying difference. The her in the mirror was smiling widely, a completely emotionless and unnatural grin. And the her in the mirror was slowly raising her hand and waving at her. Ella recoiled in terror, her heart pounding. She tripped, dropping her flashlight. In the darkness, she heard the gentle turning of the lock on room 404. The door was opening. Ella scrambled backward, staring at the gap in the doorway widening slowly. She saw a pale white hand reaching out from inside, but it was not a human hand. It was longer, skinnier, and the fingers looked like twisted cords. The hand searched the air, then touched the voice recorder she had dropped. When the door opened fully, no one was standing in the doorway. Instead, there was an icy blast of wind that blew out, carrying the scent of dust and withered jasmine. Ella tried to crawl back to her room, but she was too late. The voice recorder that the hand had just touched suddenly emitted a sound. It was Ella's own scream from a few seconds ago, but played backward and stretched out, transforming into an indescribable sound of agony. Then, the door to room 404 slammed shut with an echoing boom, and the hallway lights flickered again, then returned to normal. Ella, breathless and shaking, ran into her room and bolted the door. She checked the continuous camera footage. The clip only showed the closed door of room 404, but when she rewound the recording to the moment she looked through the keyhole, the camera captured something inexplicable. No one was in the hallway, yet the reflection on the keyhole's brass plate showed a bright, maniacal grin. Episode 7. The Breath of the Bayou. The deep swamps of Louisiana are another world, where Spanish moss hangs like secret curtains, and the black water conceals unspeakable horrors. Locals whisper about Marie Laveau, the legendary voodoo queen, and the curses that still plague the area. But there is another story about the lungs of the bayou, a perpetually waterlogged area that locals say consumes anyone who dies there, turning them into a living part of the swamp itself, never to rest in peace. Lucas, a folklore researcher and biologist, came to the area to investigate a strange phenomenon, a heartbeat being recorded deep beneath the marsh. He didn't care about voodoo. He was looking for a large, undiscovered animal species. He rented a small boat and paddled deep into the lungs. As the sun set, the swamp became eerily silent, with only the loud croaking of frogs and the gentle sound of water beneath his paddle. Lucas began deploying his seismic recording equipment. As soon as he plugged in the device, he immediately registered a sound, a deep, rhythmic thumping, as if a colossal heart was pumping blood beneath the mud. Lucas was thrilled, believing this was evidence of a giant creature. He turned on his flashlight, staring intently at the black water, trying to spot any sign of movement. Suddenly, his boat jolted, as if it hit a submerged log. But there were no logs. When Lucas tried to push the boat free, he felt a strong, pulling force from underneath, as if something invisible was holding him fast. The heartbeat sound began to grow faster and louder, sounding as if it was right beneath the hull of his boat. At the same time, the air around Lucas became thick and humid, carrying a terrible stench of mud and rotting flesh. Lucas hastily grabbed his recorder. The heartbeat suddenly turned into a gasping sound, followed by a long, drawn-out, choking groan, as if someone was slowly being submerged in the mud. He turned on his phone camera, sweeping it over the water. Nothing. But when he shone his flashlight on a nearby cypress tree trunk, he saw handprints pressed into the mud, higher than a normal person could reach. These prints were fresh, as if just made. Panicked, Lucas tried to cut his anchor line, but as he bent down, he saw the swamp water beneath his feet begin to bubble slightly. Then, a large bubble surfaced and burst right next to the boat, releasing a puff of hot vapor that carried the pungent smell of a corpse. And then, the groaning from beneath the water turned into a whispering, hoarse voice right next to his ear. "Don't go. Stay. Dry. Will be dry." Lucas whipped around. No one was there, but he felt cold, slimy fingers brush past his ankle. He looked down at his feet. The swamp water began to rise abnormally inside the boat, and a thick layer of sludge started crawling up from the floorboards. This wasn't a leak. The swamp was actively entering. Lucas used all his strength to shove himself away from the rising mud, but the boat was held fast. He only managed to throw his camera and recorder onto a nearby patch of dry land before a soaking wet arm, covered in moss and mud, shot out from beneath the water, gripping his ankle with unimaginable force. Lucas's horrified scream echoed through the silent bayou, swallowed by the bluk-bluk sound of bursting mud bubbles. The camera footage ends with a still image on the bank, and the final sound is the deep, rhythmic heartbeat from beneath the swamp, becoming slow and steady once again. Episode 8. The Sower's Farm. The vast, immense plains of Kansas are known for their corn and wheat fields stretching to the horizon. But the isolation of these places conceals chilling secrets. The story of Blackwood Farm is one of them. The farm has been abandoned since the 1930s after a horrific chain of events. Every harvest by the Blackwood family failed miserably, leading to famine, madness, and ultimately, a mass killing. It is said that an ancient entity, bound to the very soil, cursed the farm, demanding a harvest far more gruesome than wheat: human souls. Owen, a photographer obsessed with history, came to Blackwood Farm to document its decaying beauty. He camped right at the edge of the withered cornfield, where not a single stalk of corn grew taller than his knee, despite being mid-season. The air here was dry, hot, and unsettlingly still. As soon as the sun dipped below the horizon, Owen began to feel the difference. The only sound not his own was a faint scratching coming from deep within the ground. Initially, he thought it was rodents, but when he used his professional recorder, the sound was amplified. It was a slow, rhythmic clawing, as if fingernails were scraping against dry earth right beneath his tent. Interspersed with the scratching were faint whispers, indistinct words, seemingly coming from far away, traveling up through the soil. Owen turned on his flashlight, stepping out into the cornfield. The moonless night made everything pitch black. He walked past the barren corn rows and realized a horrifying fact. There was not a single insect here. The field was dead. As he ventured deeper, his flashlight swept across an old wooden stake planted in the middle of the field where the Blackwoods had buried their children. On the stake, he saw something new: an old burlap sack tied tightly with a thick, coarse rope. Owen hesitated, but curiosity won. He used his knife to cut the rope. Inside the sack, he found no bones or old items, but a layer of dark, damp mud, despite the surrounding land being desert dry. In the mud, he found a small, yellowed piece of paper with words written in dried blood. "We sowed seeds, but what grew was wrath." Suddenly, Owen heard soft footsteps right behind him. He spun around, shining his flashlight directly ahead. He saw the silhouette of a tall man wearing old farmer's clothes standing in the corn row less than 10 feet away. The man's face was completely obscured by a wide-brimmed straw hat. He stood motionless. "Who are you?" Owen asked, his voice shaking. The man did not answer. Instead, he slowly raised his hand, and Owen saw that the hand was not flesh, but damp soil and interwoven root systems. The hand rose, pointing directly at Owen. Instantly, from beneath Owen's feet, withered roots and dry brambles began to emerge, wrapping tightly around his ankles. The muddy hand began to clutch the brim of the straw hat, and as the hat was slowly pushed up, Owen saw the face underneath. A hollow, dark cavity with no eyes, nose or mouth. Only soil and black seeds that were beginning to sprout. "The harvest is come," a dry, echoing voice from deep within the earth croaked through the dark cavity. Owen screamed in pain, desperately trying to pull his feet free from the roots. He dropped his camera, but his body-mounted camera continued to record. He only managed to catch the sight of the muddy hand clutching his face. The final video footage becomes chaotic, capturing only a dark, blurry image of dirt and mud. The final sounds are horrified scratching and Owen's choking scream, mixed with a chilling, chewing sound, followed by the indistinct whispers from the earth, sounding satisfied. The last few seconds of the audio. The faint scratching begins again, searching for the next seed. Episode 9. The Light on the Silent Lighthouse. The Screaming Wind Lighthouse stands on a small, isolated, rocky island off the coast of Maine. The lighthouse has been defunct for decades, ever since the mysterious accident where the final keeper's entire family vanished without a trace on a snowy night in 1923. Since then, the lighthouse has emitted no light, but local fishermen swear that on nights of heavy fog, a light still flashes, erratically and without any pattern. They call it the light of despair, the soul of the keeper trying to warn ships about something far worse than submerged rocks. Owen, then a new character, a paranormal investigator, hired a boat to reach the island. He is a skeptic, but is drawn by the complete silence of the lighthouse. It isn't haunted by cries or growls. It's haunted by the absence of sound. He stepped onto the island, feeling the damp, deep cold embrace him. The lighthouse soared high. Its spiral staircase inside plunged into darkness. As Owen reached the top of the tower, he felt an extreme sense of isolation, as if he were the only person left alive in the world. He set up his electromagnetic field, EMF meter, and voice recorder. Everything was silent, but when Owen turned his back, the EMF device suddenly spiked to maximum, and from outside the thick glass windows, where the sea and fog were dense, he heard a loud crash, as if a heavy object had just slammed into the glass. Owen looked out. Nothing. Only fog and the sea. He looked at his recorder, which had captured the impact sound, but when he played it back, the collision sound had transformed into a silent scream, a sound of terrifying agony, yet with no pitch or volume, as if it were choked off at birth. Suddenly, the lamp of the lighthouse, dead for decades, flickered on. But it wasn't the strong, normal white light. It was a faint, sickly green beam that rotated slowly and unevenly. As the light swept across the tower room, Owen glimpsed faint, small, soaking wet handprints pressed onto the dusty glass. The most terrifying thing was, the light did not shine out to sea. It always paused and shone directly at the top of the tower, right where Owen was standing. Owen felt his body start to chill to the bone. He looked down at his feet. The metal floor was covered with small puddles of seawater, as if water had just leaked from somewhere. He tried to run down the spiral staircase, but as he took a few steps, he heard heavy, wet footsteps ascending from below. "My family," a raspy, briny voice echoed from the staircase below. "My family needs the light." Owen frantically ran back up to the tower top, where the green light was rotating. He looked down through the vent. The faint silhouette of a man in an old sailor's coat, entirely soaked in dripping water, was slowly climbing the stairs. Just as the figure was about to arrive, the lighthouse suddenly plunged into complete darkness. Owen screamed, covering his face. In the darkness, he felt a cold, clammy hand grasp his shoulder. The strong smell of seawater, moss, and dead fish wafted into his face. He struggled, dropping his handheld camera onto the floor. The final footage was just a black image. The last sounds were clashing metal and the sound of rising seawater. Then, a switch clicked, and the green light rotated again. In the final brief flash of light, the camera captured a sight. Owen standing at the tower window, but he was covered in a layer of green moss and mud. His face was vacant, and he was slowly waving toward the sea. The episode concludes with the steady rotation of the lighthouse beam and the sound of waves hitting the tower base, implying Owen has become part of the new keeper's curse. Episode 10. The Double Bed of Room 13. The Oasis Motel is an old, isolated structure nestled in the arid Nevada desert, miles away from any town. It's not famous for being haunted in the usual sense, but for the horrific time loops that occur inside. The legend of room number 13 tells of a family massacre that took place here in the 1980s. Since then, anyone who sleeps on the double bed in that room on the fateful night will be forced to relive the final moments of the slaughter. Jess, a long-haul truck driver desperate for rest, rented room 13 because it was the only one available. She found the room unusually cold and smelled strongly of stale cigarettes, but she was too tired to care. She barely managed to drop her luggage and collapsed onto the double bed on the left side. Jess fell asleep immediately, but not long after she was jolted awake by a loud noise, like a heavy pounding on the wooden door. She found herself still in room 13, but something had changed. The alarm clock on the nightstand had stopped at 3:15 a.m., and two old brown travel bags had appeared at the foot of the double bed on the right. A nameless dread washed over Jess. She turned on her phone, trying to call the police, but there was no signal. She looked toward the door. The pounding had stopped. Suddenly, she heard heavy, labored breathing coming from the double bed on the right. Jess slowly looked over. In the dim light, she saw two shadows lying on the other bed, a woman and a child. They couldn't see Jess. They were trembling, huddled together. "He's coming," the woman whispered. Immediately after, the room door suddenly burst open. The hallway light spilled in, illuminating the tall silhouette of a man standing in the doorway. He wore an old cowboy hat and held a sledgehammer in his hand. Jess was completely paralyzed, unable to move or scream. She realized she wasn't just a witness. She was part of the past. The man's shadow stepped inside, and the door slammed shut. Jess heard brutal impacts and the terrified screams of the woman and child. Even though she turned her face away, the sounds were too vivid, too real. Then, abruptly, all sounds ceased. When Jess dared to open her eyes, the man and the two shadows on the bed were gone. The room was empty again, except for her. Jess trembled as she stood up. She saw a large, dark, dried stain on the double bed sheets on the right. She tried to run out of the room, but when she touched the doorknob, she felt a strong electric shock. She stumbled back and looked at the alarm clock on the nightstand. It once again displayed 3:15 a.m. The door was pounded again, a loud slam against the wooden door. Jess frantically looked down at the foot of the right bed. The two old brown travel bags had reappeared. She realized she was trapped in the loop. She had relived the horrific moment, and it was going to happen again and again. This time, Jess didn't dare look at the bed on the right. She tried to scream, tried to run away. The door burst open again, and the tall shadow of the man appeared. Jess squeezed her eyes shut, screaming. The last sound recorded was the heavy impact of the sledgehammer, not on the woman, but on Jess's phone. After that, there was only silence. The final seconds of the audio. The alarm clock on the nightstand of room 13 ticked over to 3:15 a.m. again, and a soft, satisfied sigh echoed in the room.